Hello everyone, my name is Harry Pitt Scott and I'm a PhD student at the University of Warwick. First of all, I want to thank the organisers for all the hard work they put into making this exciting conference happen, especially under the current circumstances. The themes of this conference are emergence and emergency and the connections between them. In this paper, I'm going to reflect on that connection through Stanley Robinson's Ministry for the Future, a novel that narrates an imagined energy transition that came out last year. The paper has two parts. I'm going to make an argument about the relationship between utopian fiction and transition. Alongside this, I'm going to do a brief reading of the novel's representation of a speculative currency called a carbon coin, and use it to think about connections between energy, finance, and democratic culture in an era of climate emergency. So half will be about the novel's form, half will be about the novel's content. After thinking through this relationship between form and content as an angle onto emergence and emergency, I will end with some provisional remarks on culture in the Anthropocene. For Raymond Williams, the problem of literary form is a problem of the relation between collective modes and individual projects. Specific social relations are recognized and activated through forms. Whether individual projects are recognized as a particular form is one way that new cultural meanings and perceptions are offered and tested, accepted or rejected. Recognition, however, becomes more difficult in times of change. Forms are the activation of specific social relationships, but if social relationships are unstable, then recognition can be too. Perhaps this goes some way to explaining the confusion that marked the Ministry for the Future's reception. Bill McKibben, a figurehead of the climate movement, wrote a review of the novel entitled "It's Not Science Fiction," an active characterization that is once a claim about the politics of form. He claims it is not utopian, it's anti-dystopian, realist to its core. Andreas Malm, however, calls it more utopia than dystopia. Jerry Canavan, an expert on Stanley Robinson's novels, simply called it his grimmest book to date, offering no categorization at all. So what is at stake in these formal categorizations? Ministry for the Future is a novel that begins in 2025, with a wet bulb heat wave that hits a vulnerable region, Uttar Pradesh in India. It was getting hotter, the first line of the novel reads. An electrical grid brownout means air conditioning stops working and, over the course of several days, millions are exposed to lethal heat. This tragedy sets in motion a series of immediate responses to climate emergency that sets in motion others, and so on, ultimately initiating a transition out of fossil capitalism. The novel ends some 30 years later, after a long struggle over the transition, with the world system on its way to being post-capitalist and decarbonized. It is an important novel because, as far as I know, it is the only one that offers a narrative of decarbonization that is not a dystopia of scarcity and social collapse, as is so common in contemporary science fiction. So there's clearly some confusion surrounding the novel's form, and it's to do with how we understand the novel's narrative. Is it a realist one, as McKibben thinks, because, in his words, in taking on heat and glacial melt and fire, Robinson is writing more realistic fiction than most contemporary novelists, for whom the physical world remains a backdrop for more interior stories? Or is it utopian because, at present, such hope seems unrealistic, even naive? Or is it science fiction, given the amount of new technologies, politics and societies that emerge out of the not-quite-fictional emergency? In Marxism and Literature, Williams writes that periods of major transition between social systems are commonly marked by the emergence of radically new forms. In such periods of major and indeed minor transition, it is common to find apparent continuations or even conscious revivals of older forms, which yet, when they are really looked at, can be seen to be new. I'm going to offer my own tentative categorization of the novel's form by suggesting that, while it seems continuous with older forms, it really is offering something new. The confusion surrounding the recognition of the Ministry for the Future, and therefore the social relationships that it activates, are a symptom of this newness, which emerges out of a response to our period of major transition. As my title implies, I think the novel is a transitional utopia. My influence here is Tom Moylan, who saw the re-emergence of what he called a critical utopia in the 1960s and 1970s as the destruction, preservation and transformation of the classical utopian genre to suit the political situation of the period. In his words, a central concern of the critical utopia is, quote, the awareness of the limitations of the utopian tradition, so that these texts reject utopia as blueprint while preserving it as dream. Furthermore, the novels dwell on the conflict between the originary world and the utopian society opposed to it, so that the process of social change is more directly articulated. I think Robinson has done something comparable here. He has found a way to create a new form for utopian fiction for the situation of transition, a transition between energy systems, and a transition in the mode of production itself. If the classical utopia describes an alternative society, a critical utopia contrasts societies, then the transitional utopia changes the emphasis again, narrating how the transition to utopia is actually created and lived in the present. Components of the present, imperfect as they are for an alternative future, are assessed to see how they might function as transitional forms. The alternative society remains an essential temporal orientation, but the utopian form has been adapted to the historical situation of the contemporary moment by placing the most narrative weight on the social potentials of the present. How is this achieved in Ministry for the Future? The novel has a series of interconnected strands, each with its own focus on an important climate issue: science, politics, activism, violence, geoengineering, decarbonisation, carbon capture, and the one I will talk about, finance. The scope of the novel is immense, and in a way I think that is probably deliberate, prevents synoptic outlines. It contains riddles, debates, theoretical asides, and future speculative histories, pushing the boundaries of what a novel is and how a novel can represent transition. The novel tells the stories of these interconnected strands through the eponymous Ministry for the Future, a UN organisation that functions a bit like how Lukács saw the typical characters of realist novels, a central figure in whose life all the important extremes in the world of the novel converge, and around whom a complete world with all its vital contradictions can be organised. The Ministry serves this role of narrative organisation. The head of the Ministry, Mary Murphy, realises that one of the most important levers of power in directing climate action are central banks, and the financial strand of the novel describes her attempt to persuade them to go beyond their current mandate of financial stability and governance of national money supplies, and to address the political problem of decarbonisation with the financial instruments available to them. Given that this is precisely what is being worked out, for example by the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the novel is commendable for its injunction to think about the politics of climate finance. The solution devised in the novel is called a carbon coin. Modelled after blockchain currencies, carbon coins are a currency issued in exchange for not burning carbon or sequestering carbon over a long time period. A carbon coin's value, if that is the correct term, is made through storing CO2 in the ground. The novel says that the new carbon coin has stimulated many short-term investments in carbon sequestration projects and many longer-term investments in the coin itself. It had caused some of the biggest carbon owners to cash out and keep fossil carbon in the ground, or use it for plastics if they could. Coal had become just a black rock you turn into money by leaving it alone. This is exemplary of the style that causes confusions in formal recognition. While speculative, it sounds more like history or political economy than a novel. While I don't have time to enter into a discussion about value, it does seem to me that Robinson attempts to think about a form of money that might lead to a transition beyond fossil fuel, and perhaps beyond capitalist value entirely, and thus to a post-capitalist money. The novel imagines a financial incentive to carbon sequestration programs in a way that is currently impossible, given that stored carbon currently has no economic value. After all, it is not a commodity, but huge social value, because stored carbon does not contribute to cumulative greenhouse gas emissions. As is well known, economic growth is strongly correlated with carbon emissions. The novel imagines a way of reversing this trend. What this means is that Robinson is engaging in a technique characteristic of science fiction, what Darko Suvin famously calls cognitive estrangement. As Cheryl Vint argues, in its role as a genre that defamiliarizes the present by exaggerating it into an imagined future, science fiction can serve a vital role in reminding us that money is a social technology, not a thing. Mistaking money for a thing is one way of misunderstanding how energy shapes the modern world. From fossil capital and petrodollars to energy markets and ESG ratings, how money and finance mediate and represent energy is of crucial importance to how we think about the future of energy in society. One way of thinking about a transitional utopia, then, is seeing it as an attempt to cultivate a newly shared perception of finance as a social technology. How does Robinson go about this? Firstly, through narrative. In the first instance, sometime around 2025, Mary Murphy fails to convince the central banks. But as diegetic time elapses, reinforced by the novel's episodic, disjointed style, the imagined situation changes. New technologies for cooperative and public banking emerge. There's economic stagnation, unemployment, and social upheaval. The climate emergency escalates with extreme weather such as seawater rises, heat waves, floods, and species extinction. There are inevitable political responses: sabotage, warfare, and violence targeted at the centres of carbon finance. Each element exerts pressure on the central bankers. The carbon coin only meets with success because climate activists are disrupting fossil capitalist industries. New social movements are forcing decarbonisation, and technologies are developed to meet pressing problems of transport, energy storage, and so on. One thing the novel makes clear is the interconnection and interdependency across the world system, while emphasising the historical embeddedness of institutions and ideas. Carbon coins are a resolution to an overdetermined situation, in which contradictions from hitherto separate levels of the social structure are condensed into a single identifiable political moment and problem. Even in the exclusive and insulated realm of high finance and central banks, the effect of the whole social process forces the necessary change, forcing an adaptation in the social technology of finance towards different ends than they have in our own financialized society. The way we talk about money is social, cultural, and environmental, both in its technology and how it is used. This is what Robinson wants us to recognize in reading the novel. So alongside this defamiliarization of money, the reader is posed a series of questions. The reader is asked, why do we do things? Ooh, next slide. No, previous slide. Yeah, previous slide. Why do we do things? What do we want? What would be fair? How can we best arrange our lives together on this planet? Our current economics has not yet answered any of these questions. But why should it? Do you ask your calculator what to do with your life? No, you have to figure that out for yourself. With this in mind, the novel's proposals no longer look like solutions, but calls to active participation in discussions of, among other things, financing the energy transition. I'm going to end my much too brief explanation of the carbon coin here, and end with some reflections on what I think Ministry for the Future and Transitional Utopias can tell us about the role of literature and culture in the Anthropocene. I started this paper by talking about how the social recognition of forms is a way of activating specific social relationships. The implication being that difficulties of formal recognition can be a symptom of an attempt to create new, emergent kinds of social relationships. So what kind of relationship is a transitional utopia trying to create? Frederick Jameson once wrote that the deepest vocation of the utopian genre is to demonstrate and to dramatize our incapacity to imagine the future. Thus, in a negative way, forcing us to confront our inability to imagine otherness and radical difference while preserving the idea of it. I want to propose a modification to this claim for a transitional utopia, which has some resemblance to other utopian fiction, but I think is really something new. The deepest vocation of a transitional utopia is to cultivate our capacity, individually and collectively, to imagine and direct the transition from a fossil fuel society to an alternative one. It is therefore an attempt to create the conditions of possibility for its own imagined future. The social recognition of a transitional utopia and the social relationships it activates are about creating subjects whose relation to energy is not distant, insulated, or unconscious, but active, democratic, and consciously directed. About cultivating habits of perception appropriate to a culture capable of thinking collectively about energy. A collective thinking in contrast to privatized thinking, which sees energy transition as an opportunity for private investment rather than public good. Extension of the logic of carbon democracy and carbon finance into the energy transition. Williams writes in Politics and Letters that we have to learn to look at resources in a socially useful rather than a capitalist way. And this is what Ministry for the Future is trying to articulate and communicate. Williams emphasized the importance of thinking about what he called the long revolution as a singular process that is misunderstood if it is separated into a democratic revolution, an industrial revolution, and a cultural revolution. What mattered was how they all fit together. As a novel that attempts to cultivate habits and perceptions required for seeing the possibility of a democratic process in energy transition, Ministry for the Future offers an emergent form that does not treat democracy, industry and culture as separate, but thinks them together, as struggles at the scale of the whole social process. I think this is the work of culture in the Anthropocene, finding ways of recognising a common inheritance, making a common future, and locating some of the social relationships and technologies that will get us there. Thanks very much for listening.